Hello everyone! In today's lesson, we're going to deal with Module 2, speaking part. And more exactly, we're going to deal with telling anecdotes, describing things, and expressing reasons. Let's enter into more detail for each of them. Now, in everyday English and in everyday life, we often tell anecdotes. Anecdotes are short stories, funny or interesting events that we share with people socially and professionally. In order to capture the listener's attention, the anecdotes needs to have some structure, and more exactly, it needs to have the introduction, which gives the background to the story and why people will find it interesting to listen, the beginning, which means explaining how the story started, the story itself, the main events of it, and the end, which means making a final comment about the story and how things are now. Now, let's look at some phrases that you could use to get started with each of those stages. In the introduction, you could use the following expressions. You're not going to believe this, but, or did I ever tell you about the time I was, I'll never forget the time when I was. In the beginning, we can say, it's quite a few years ago. Talking of, well, that reminds me of the time or this was around the time of, and you'll never guess who, where, what, and etc. For the story itself, we can use the following phrases. You should have heard or seen her or him or them, depending on the situation. And then to top it all, and the strange or funny or stupid thing was that, can you imagine my surprise when, by the time I'd realized what had happened, and the end of it, anyway, to cut a long story short, so in the end, what happened was, seems quite funny now, but it didn't at that time, or you could say, anyway, it turned out well in the end. Now, during this lesson, we dealt with journeys, traveling experiences, etc. It is very important to describe a travel experience. And while describing something interesting to someone, it is your responsibility to get that individual involved enough to be virtually transported to that incredible experience. Of course, it is important that you focus on your English language well enough by making use of the adequate English vocabulary. Now, please take into consideration the following advice while describing an experience of a travel or a journey. Now, please avoid telling details such as schedule, names of all the restaurants, castles, people you met, etc. This would make your description boring for the listener. Be creative. Surprise your listener with small details he doesn't know about that place. For example, you could include details such as some special information taken from the natives. Lastly, include adverbs such as really, remarkably, absolutely, truly, entirely, etc. Use a variety of adjectives, especially the strong ones. You could use spectacular, exhausting, awesome. You could say astonishing, breathless, frantic, weary, horrible, etc., depending, of course, on your own experiences. And last but not least, please make your recommendations and your comments on your travel experience. Now, the last part of our speaking class today is about expressing reasons and arguments, prioritizing, and recommending. I want you to think about the following situation. Imagine that you have one holiday for two and have invited a friend of yours to go with you. Now, there are several options for you to choose from. Give your own opinion and, of course, give arguments for that. Below, you have a table with expressions, words, or phrases you can use in each situation. For example, to express choice or a reason, you could use, I think we should probably choose, or I don't think we should go for, as, why don't we opt for, and then we could, or a more less interesting option would be since. Now, when prioritizing, you could use the following expression. the most or least attractive holiday is, we shouldn't overlook, or another point to consider, and last but not least. And lastly, when recommending, you could say, I would or wouldn't recommend. It might be a good idea too because, and then you give your own reasons. We should definitely, or we should give a miss. This was all we had prepared today for the speaking class of Unit 2. Thank you everyone for your attention.